Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. The main story this week, the huge worldwide provocation starting from the so-called film, a very obscure operation, but mainly a provocation designed to get the results that it has now gotten. We'll get into the process that led to the creation of this film. But we're dealing here with a coordinated, covert operation. We are dealing with an October surprise. It's an October surprise, even though it's still September. The dynamic is that of an October surprise, a worldwide provocation designed to influence the outcome of the U.S. election. In whose favor? In the favor of Romney, to get Obama out. Obama now viewed as a Wall Street puppet who has outlived his usefulness. The ruling class, as we've said, is intent on dumping Obama and installing Mitt Romney for a fascist-like austerity dictatorship. But there's also a question of changing the entire mode in the Middle East, of ending the Obama era of color revolutions and going back to the neocon method of direct military attack. It's an October surprise. It's a September-October surprise, and the goal is to Carterize Obama, to remind everybody that he's the new Jimmy Carter. Well, that's the scenario that I already warned you about 4+ years ago in Obama the Postmodern Coup and in Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography. The goal is hostage-taking. Yes, indeed, hostage crises have to occur, according to this scenario, as well as the murder of U.S. Diplomatic officials, such as Ambassador Stevens, that we're going to talk about in a minute. But the main thing to understand is this is not a sociological phenomenon. It's not that somebody gets the idea to make a crackpot film and then somebody on the other side of the world happens to see this, becomes indignant, and mobilizes huge forces. That is fundamentally not what it is. It's a coordinated, covert operations. 3 main components in the network that is carrying this out. First of all, the CIA Mormon mafia, the Brent Scowcroft faction, the Danites, we can call them. The Scowcroft people, maybe that's the way to start it. Remember that for many years, the boss, the biggest single influence on hiring in the State Department, the intelligence community, the CIA, was Kissinger. And who was Kissinger's right-hand man? Who was the detail man that did the work that Kissinger wanted done? Well, that's Brent Scowcroft, and that goes back 40 to 50 years. Remember, Brent Scowcroft on 9/11 was waiting in a doomsday aircraft, and according to some accounts, flying around. And if the U.S. had been decapitated on 9/11, maybe we would have been under the Brent Scowcroft regime, whether we knew it or not. The CIA Mormon Mafia, remember that the Mormons, the young men, are all sent overseas for about 1.5 to 2 years of missionary work. They come back with the experience of foreign places. They come back speaking or understanding something of foreign languages. Where do they then go to work? They go right into the CIA. So we're dealing with a CIA Mormon mafia. What is their goal? To install Romney as president, to essentially make all of their careers, right? They know that with Mike Leavitt, the corrupt individual left over from the Salt Lake City Games, this guy who believes in the legitimacy of polygamy as a religious belief, this guy who is the current generation of the Mountain Meadows Massacre. If you have Mike Leavitt sitting in the White House making the personnel decisions, then every Mormon knows that they are headed for the top like a rocket, and that is something that they want. There's also the collective question of power over the United States, fulfilling the White Horse prophecy, carrying out the resentments that they have nursed against the United States for a good 150 or 170 years. So the first group that's carrying out this operation is the CIA Mormon Mafia, the Brent Scowcroft faction in the intelligence community. Now, second component, we know that the main political alliance at work with Romney is the one with Netanyahu, that Romney and Netanyahu are joined at the hip and have been since 1976 when they met at Boston Consulting Group. Netanyahu, a desperate demagogue, a Likudnik reactionary, obviously intervening in a very heavy-handed way, a ham-handed way, I might say, this week in U.S. politics, really causing a scandal which would have been greater if it hadn't been overtaken by these events in Libya and Egypt. The Netanyahu Likudniks and the neocons are throwing their weight into the scales for Romney, right? The main path for the neocons to come back to power is by getting Romney elected, and we've pointed in the past to the people around Romney, his handlers. 2/3 of all of his announced advisors are Bush-Cheney neocons. We're talking Dan Senior, the spokesman for the coalition authority there under Jerry Bremer in Iraq in 2003, 2004. We're talking Elliot Cohen, one of the top-level neocons from Johns Hopkins. We're talking John Bolton. John Bolton, the key guy right now, because he's the one who's going to become Secretary of State if everything is on track, right? A madman who could not get confirmed even by a Senate with a Republican majority back during the second term of the Bush administration. You've also got Robert Kagan, you've got Robert Joseph, you've got this entire crew of neocons around Romney. You've also got then the Netanyahu people coming together. So they want this to happen. Something to embarrass Obama, a hostage crisis, something that shows that the entire Obama foreign policy has been feckless, pointless, that it's blowing back, right, that the fomenting and supporting of the color revolutions known as the Arab Spring, that was a bad thing, that it has put power into the hands of Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood, which, of course, is to a very large extent true. So, Mormon mafia, Scowcroft faction, Netanyahu Likudniks plus U.S. neocons, number 2. Number 3, Saudi Salafists and Wahhabites, the group that attacked the U.S. Embassy in Libya. Well, who are they? Well, those are Al-Qaeda death squads, Al-Qaeda or close enough to it. Maybe they're Libyan Islamic fighting group. Maybe they're something else. The Wahhabites, the people back in Saudi Arabia who are the ideological kingpins of this entire thing. They're the ones who pay the death squads, be it in Syria, be it in Libya last year and now. So I would say these three groups have come together to make this movie appear and then to make the death squads appear, as, for example, in the case of Libya, and with Netanyahu's public interventions to also box in this Obama-Hillary Clinton crew from that point of view. So it's a three-pronged attack. Again, an October surprise. Remember, this is what these people do. Back in 1980, right? Bush negotiating with the hostage takers there in Iran that this had to be prolonged beyond the election so that Carter could not get reelected. And that's something that we're seeing now. Watch for the taking of hostages at some of these diplomatic posts. This could happen just about anywhere. The goal, once again, to Carterize Obama. Now we're going to get Bolton saying this in just a second. Back in 1 minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. We've just sketched out the general conceptual framework. What's going on here with the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Libya, the killing of Ambassador Stevens and others, the 17 embassies that are under attack today, Tunis and Khartoum, seemingly the most energetic attacks, but watch out for all different places, even the ones you don't expect. Watch out for hostage-taking. Watch out for more assassinations and general chaos. It also projects inside the United States, right? We get these alarms, threatening phone calls, bomb threats, North Dakota State, University of Texas, Valparaiso State, I think in the Midwest. So all of this stuff going on. What's the bottom line? CIA, Mormon, mafia, Scowcroft faction on the attack, joined by Netanyahu, Likudniks, and neocons. Want to get Romney in there. And Saudi Salafists and Wahhabites, who would probably also like to get Romney in. They also would like to shut down this Arab Spring and make themselves indispensable once again to the United States, so that no fomenting goes on in their bailiwick there, in their backyard. Now let's try to go through this somewhat systematically. Let's start off with this provocation film. The film is called The Innocence of Muslims. There's some question about how it started out. It started out as The Innocence of bin Laden. It then became The Innocence of Muslims, and on the internet you can see a certain number of minutes of this film. All right, so it was supposedly the actors who took part in this have come forward to say that they thought it was a film about a guy called George. Again, all of these stories, we're now in the realm of intelligence agencies. So all of this stuff, cum grano salis. Now, the Wall Street Journal did an interview on this past Tuesday to the guy who claimed to be the director, Sam Basile, Sambacile. He says he's a 52-year-old Israeli-American real estate developer. He doesn't like Islam, and he says his film was funded by Jewish donors to the tune of $5 million. Well, that's an interesting story. Again, I wouldn't believe any of this as it comes in as raw intelligence. The phone number traced by the Wall Street Journal leads to Cerritos, California, and the home of somebody called Nakula Basili Nakula, Bassely. Sounds a little bit like Basile, but it's probably the other name that he goes by, because we're now in the realm of the spooks, Sam Basili, Basselley. Who is this person? There's now two parties, of course. One that says he's an Israeli for sure. That's eminently possible. There's another approach which says no, he's a Coptic Christian from Egypt. Right? This is the Christian minority in Egypt, about 10% of the Egyptian population. Now, whichever of these two pans out, this is going to fan the flames of the operation. It's clever the way this was designed, because it was designed. Nakula is, we are told, a famous saint of the Coptic Christian religion. This is one of the first Coptic martyrs, as I understand it, back in the time of the Roman Empire, the Roman invasion, probably under the Emperor Titus, who came into the Middle East, that this name, I'm sorry, the name is Abanob. Abanob is the critical name. The guy Abanob Basili, this is the typical Coptic name, Saint Abanub, Abonoub, a Coptic saint named after an Egyptian child martyred by the Romans. So that would be Coptic. And then the thing that the movie was promoted by Morris Sadek, Sadek, the head of the National American Coptic Assembly. So maybe Israeli, maybe Coptic. Doesn't matter the nationality or other characteristics of the patsy are totally immaterial, or of the various operatives that play their part. If it's Israeli, that fans the flames. If it's Coptic, that can fan the flames too. That can get you a civil war in Egypt between the 10% that are Copts and the 90% that are not. Probably not 90%, but some large faction of that. So this can go in a number of directions. Now, it's the document itself, of course, is a piece of banal stupidity, but this is not the issue. It's designed to have this effect, and it's not even that they just put that up and then sit there and hope that somebody will be outraged and go into the streets. They make sure that it will. And for this, we can transfer to the London Independent of Friday, the 14th of September today. A story that you should look at there, the London Independent revealed inside story of a U.S. envoy's assassination. Here this is now the question of the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. Now, go to tarpley.net. You will see that I wrote the book when it came to that West Point study, popularization of the West Point study that showed that the Benghazi-Derna-Tobruk corridor was terrorist recruiting paradise for Al-Qaeda when they wanted to get fighters to send into Iraq, not even so much to fight the U.S. occupation forces, but to get fighters that would go in and attack the Shiites of the lower Euphrates. Right, that was the goal. That was the death squad solution. Right, the Negroponte Salvadoran solution, or should I say the Negroponte Ford Salvadoran solution, was to rile up the Sunni forces inside Iraq and get them to attack the Shiites, and therefore to generate a civil war, which would then relieve the pressure on the U.S. occupation. And that was done, and it succeeded. And what you see now with the death squads in Syria is simply the seamless continuation of that entire thing, with Ambassador Ford taking the lead. Now, what about Ambassador Stevens now? Is he possibly somebody not so different from Ambassador Negroponte and Ambassador Ford, both of them active in the Iraq death squad situation as well as in Syria? Well, this may well be. De mortuis nihil nisi bonum usually, but on the other hand, we got to know what was going on. And we'll just get to this now in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. CIA, Mormon, mafia, Netanyahu, Likudniks, and U.S. neocons, Saudi Salafists controlled by Wahhabites, all attacking, and that's what you see. That's the 17 countries where U.S. embassies are under attack. The goal, an October surprise, Carterize Obama installed Mitt Romney with an austerity dictatorship backed up by the widespread denial of the right to vote. And I guess we're having a little bit of technical difficulty today, but I think we can continue. Now let's just we'll look at this incident in Benghazi, right? The terror corridor we talked about in the last segment. I had written back in March of 2011, based on that West Point study. This is terrorist paradise. This is where you have more of these Salafis. This is the land of the Senussi Brotherhood. This is the land of the monarchy of King Idris and his royal court, fomented by the British against the Italians, and then used by British intelligence coming from Egypt against Gaddafi over many years. And now they've won out and they've taken over. And this is now an area which is chock full of death squads, heavily armed death squads running wild. And they had already attacked this same consulate in Benghazi before using an IED, right? One of these roadside bombs had been set off there. So this was known to be a very, very hot corner. So much so that in addition to the public consulate, which was a place that could be recognized and people could go to, right? You need a visa, you go to the consulate. but there was also a secret safe house apartment of the U.S. in the same area, right, the same town, and that safe house was thought to be secret. So the idea was if a death squad comes and starts attacking the U.S. consulate, Benghazi, that the personnel can get out of there and flee and take refuge in this secret safe house apartment. And the story was that the people who did the killing, the death squad that actually did all this, a highly trained death squad with professional characteristics, they knew exactly where the secret safe house was. The safe house had been completely compromised. Therefore, had the U.S. structure been infiltrated, there's also the question about the Libyan security guards, right? They seem to have disappeared. They ran away. There are conflicting reports. One says that there were 10 Libyan guards killed. Another one says none of them killed. They all ran away. Why was that? Was it because of a general ideological sympathy with the attackers, or was it because of a specific suborning through an intelligence network? We always tend towards the latter if everything else is equal. The other issue is the background of it, the fact that there had been a build-up to this. It's a two-level operation. You've got a crowd of dupes who are lower-level people, and the crowd of dupes are there for a protest which is, partly peaceful, partly violent, right? A few Molotov cocktails, a few things like this, right? Sort of, low-level violence. And then you've got a group which is a death squad out to kill and assassinate the diplomatic personnel. Even at the two-level area, right, you can see that the crowd of dupes was motivated by this film, right, which many of them have not seen, or they've been told that this is a terrible thing. And then we're also told that the actual death squad seems to have been motivated by the desire to avenge the death of al-Libi, Libi being a top leader of Al-Qaeda, Libyan Islamic fighting group, and so forth, who had been killed by a U.S. drone strike 4 to 6 weeks to 8 weeks in advance. I'm skeptical about all of that. I see it as this is a coordinated operation. It's all done too much on a clock to make it spontaneous, sociological. You have to remember, we called attention in the spring of last year to the presence of Hasidi Hassadi Belhaj, this top leader of the Patsy milieu. This is a double agent, a mercenary. He became military governor of Tripoli for a while. These are his people. Or imagine the commando that killed General Yunus so that General Hifter, the guy who had been brought in from the CIA, from Langley, could take over the armed forces. Now, whichever way this cuts, you get the idea, right? You're in a wilderness, a jungle of competing covert operations, but you get the general idea. So none of this, in my view, is spontaneous. It's all orchestrated, and these components are put up. This movie put up, and the other stuff put up as a means of making this plausible to the dupes around the world. Now, let's go a little bit further. We've got to also look at the ambassador, and that is Ambassador Stevens. Now, what do we know about him? There's an interesting piece in French, which has, you can see it on the internet. It's written by Bernard-Henri Lévy, and Bernard-Henri Lévy, remember, is the fake nouveau philosophe of Once Upon a Time, who is now, he was a top advisor to Sarkozy, and he seems to be one of the people who pushed Sarkozy as hard as he could to get this done. Obviously an operative of somebody. Bernard-Henri Lévy has written a kind of an obituary for Ambassador Stevens, where he says, "This was a great guy, this was my friend, This was somebody I admired, and we'll tell a little bit about it. He says, this is now the victory of the imbeciles. The imbeciles have won out. In other words, the people who did the killing were stupid. No, I'm sorry, stupid is not enough. This is an operation. Now, there is a legitimate question. Why would somebody like Stevens be sacrificed in this kind of an operation? And that is not 100% clear. So what does BHL tell us? That on March 14th, 2011, Bernard-Henri Lévy met with Jabril. Remember Jabril, the guy with the big forehead? You've seen him, right? He became the head of the government of the Transitional National Council, the rebel council of Benghazi. And Jabril was begging France and the U.S. to intervene militarily. That was going to happen then on the 19th of March, right? The bombing started on the 19th of March. Jabril was there in Paris, and Hillary was there in Paris. And what BHL, Bernard-Henri Lévy, says is that he got a meeting with Hillary for Jabril, and part of the meeting was Ambassador Stevens. So he calls him the one of the secret artisans of the freedom of Libya, artisan secret de sa liberté. So he's one of the secret artisans of the freedom of Libya. In other words, an important behind-the-scenes operative. And then BHL is obviously quite smitten by Stevens. He says that he met him also a little bit later on the Brega Road with his dazzling smile and his elegance, even out there in the desert. So, again, Bernard-Henri Lévy's conclusion is that the killers are simply imbeciles. Well, we'll talk more about this in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. A concerted operation to get 17 U.S. Embassies and consulates under attack in that many countries. CIA, Mormon, mafia, pro-Romney. The Likud forces around Netanyahu, pro-Romney. The neocons that are on his staff, pro-Romney. And the Saudi Wahhabites and Salafists who provide the foot soldiers. In other words, the mother of Al-Qaeda, in effect. These three groups taking part. Now, Ambassador Stevens may have been a unintended consequence. He may be collateral damage. It's really hard to say. One wonders what he was doing. We've just heard that Bernard-Henri Lévy is very upset that he's no longer there. He's telling us that Ambassador Stevens was a key guy in convincing Hillary Clinton to undertake the bombing of Libya on the 19th of March, 2011. This goes back to a Paris meeting of March 14th, 2011, with Jabril, Hillary, Stevens, BHL, all being there, and this seems to have gotten the ball rolling. What would he... what task would bring Ambassador... excuse me. What task would bring Ambassador Stevens to a dangerous place like Benghazi at this time, especially a consulate which had been attacked with a pretty significant IED-style bomb only a few weeks before? Well, we do know that there's been a call put out by the CIA and NATO intelligence that they need more fighters to be sent to Syria. And if you want to get some fighters for Syria, again, the best place to go is that terror corridor of Benghazi, Derna, and Tobruk. And it can very well be that Ambassador Stevens was there for something in connection with that he was recruiting, he was arranging, and so forth. What is not so clear is why then they would interrupt this, why they would disrupt their own operation. But again, sometimes these things go wrong, right? Once the killing and the bombing start, it's sometimes difficult to say. And the story is that he died of smoke inhalation. So it's not that there was some specific attempt to single him out and attack him, but that he was there. So that may have been a coincidence. Anyway, we can't pretend to organize to explain every detail, but you get the general idea. He had been to Germany, Austria, and Sweden. What would one be doing in Germany, Austria, and Sweden? Just let your imagination go, right? The Muslim populations in these places, right? Austria is the headquarters of OPEC. Germany, extremely important for all these operations. Just see what you can see. We're also told that Egyptian intelligence, the Egyptian government had warned the United States on September 4th that possible attacks might be forthcoming. So these are some of the aspects of what's going on. Sam Bassell sounds like, Uncle Sam is an imbecile. Some of these things they're like the names in the James Bond movies or Dickens, right? They mean something. Josiah Bounderby. These names have some idea, or indeed in the Restoration comedy with Congreve and others. So anyway, you get the idea. Now let's look at Netanyahu, because Netanyahu was very much in the center of things, and would have been more in the center of things if these attacks had not occurred. Last week, about a week ago now, that would be around September 7th, September 8th, on the eve of 9/11, or maybe on 9/11, Hillary Clinton had been asked, does the U.S. have a red line in regard to the Iranian nuclear program? And Hillary said, no, we don't have a red line. No red lines for the U.S. in that regard. And then we get what looks like on the surface to be the usual hysterical outburst, the usual rage fit by Netanyahu when he doesn't get what he wants or when somebody contradicts him, that he says, if you don't have a red line, then you have no moral right to give us a red light. So if you don't have a red line, you have no moral right to impose a red light on our attack on Iran. Now this, it seems to me, it may well have more to do with the desire to get Obama out of office, and above all to get Romney in, because that's what Netanyahu wants. It may have more to do with the U.S. presidential election than with any attack, although it may also have a lot to do with an attack. But it seems to me it's more that he wants to get his friend Romney in the White House, after which he will basically get everything he wants and stay in power more or less forever, right? We've talked in previous weeks about the Netanyahu-Romney alliance. We also had the deputy speaker of the Knesset on Wednesday morning, I believe, going on the Morning Joe MSNBC interview program with Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski. This deputy speaker of the Knesset pretty much called for war, that the U.S. has to attack Iran, and no two ways about it. And there was an interesting outburst against this by Joe Klein of Time magazine, that this was outrageous, that this was meddling in the internal affairs of the United States. Well, that's certainly true, as far as it goes. It is a blatant, outrageous interference in U.S. internal affairs by Netanyahu. And remember, Netanyahu is a reactionary thug. He is an austerity ghoul. He has destroyed the Israeli standard of living. You saw those people out there demonstrating, right? The largest demonstration in the history of Israel is in effect an anti-Netanyahu demonstration, people saying, under your neocon, right-wing, libertarian economics, Netanyahu, we cannot survive, right? As child poverty through the roof, as we've noted in past broadcasts. So Netanyahu is obviously ready to fight to the last American, isn't he? He wants the U.S. out in front, and the U.S. will take the losses. Now, the obvious temper of the American people is sick of war. it's 2/3 now on Afghanistan, that the Afghanistan business should come pretty much to an immediate end. No more Afghanistan, no more Iraq, no more of this other stuff. Netanyahu says, no, I have a new war for you. This is obviously a big issue in the presidential campaign, although there's a lot of deception going on there. It's also interesting to see Netanyahu says the U.S. should have a publicly stated red line. And the next question would be, hey, Netanyahu, what's your publicly stated red line? And, of course, the answer is he does not have one. Netanyahu demands that the U.S. take a stand for war, which he himself is not willing to do. Isn't that interesting? What hypocrisy. Now, the other aspect of this, which is worth mentioning, we've seen in the past weeks, right, we had a prediction that the end of Ramadan, right, the Eid this year would then lead to an escalation of the protest movements and the anti-government movements in Egypt. I'm sorry, not in Egypt, but in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and elsewhere, right, in the reactionary monarchies, the neo-feudal monarchies of the Gulf. And this has happened to some extent. Especially Bahrain has been quite active, and it's probably happening much more than we know of, because the ability to get news out of Saudi Arabia is of course quite limited. So there is this question of, could these demonstrations kick over into something that the plotters don't want, which would be actual revolutions in the reactionary monarchies of the Gulf? That's a definite possibility, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the second hour of this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Now, to sum up, we devoted the first hour to sketching what has happened now in the past week. It is an October surprise. It's an October surprise a couple of weeks early. We're still in September, but that's the general idea. Main goal, to Carterize Obama. And we'll hear from Bolton here in just a minute. To Carterize Obama, to get him out, to get Romney in. Three main groups: the CIA Mormon mafia, also known as the Scowcroft faction, also known as the Danites or Neo-Danites. They want Romney, obviously. That will make all of their careers. They will go rocketing to the top in every agency under the well-known Mormon nepotism and block voting and mutual admiration rules. Number two, Netanyahu and Likud, joined by U.S. neocons, especially John Bolton, Dan Senior, Robert Joseph, Robert Kagan, Elliot Cohen, and so on down the line, the people that will have the say in foreign policy. You can see what a jerk, what an absolute bungler Romney is in foreign policy. Who will make the decisions? The neocons. So if you did not like the mad dogs that were running foreign policy under Bush Cheney, now you're going to have a second group of mad dogs who have learned nothing and who really just want to avenge the humiliations of the first group. Third group, you couldn't do this without the Saudis. Prince Bandar, presumably, the Salafists, the Wahhabites. This is the belief structure of these death squads, people who are willing to get killed because of what they have been promised in religious terms. Now, let's just sum this all up. On the morning of, one morning this past week, that would be on Wednesday morning on WMAL. WMAL is the reactionary station here, the one that has Hannity and Limbaugh and O'Reilly. Limbaugh and Hannity in the afternoon, and Mark Levin after that. They have a madman on in the morning. Here we have John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I think with a recess appointment, guys, doesn't he get an asterisk? But a Romney advisor, a Romney handler. Here's what Bolton has to say. This is the whole strategy, more or less, printed out for you. Quote, I've said for 3.5 years, the president doesn't care about national security. He doesn't think the world is terribly threatening, says Bolton. quote, I think a weak reaction, a failure to demonstrate American power and resolve, will help see this stretch through the region. I come back to Tehran in 1979, the hostage crisis, and if we're not careful here, we're going to see a repetition of that crisis, which of course was a major factor contributing to the destruction of the Jimmy Carter administration, says Bolton. Now, could that be any clearer? This is what he's thinking. I just want to give it again. I think a weak reaction, a failure to demonstrate American power and resolve, will help see this stretch through the region. In other words, if Obama doesn't bomb somebody fast, then he will lose standing. And of course, if he does bomb, he'll hurt himself with his own base and with the American people in general. Sick and tired of yahoos and warmongers, Obama has done a lot in that regard, but he's generally done it under a kind of a stealthy profile, as in Libya, right, leading from behind, when in reality the U.S. was the main contributor to the bombing of Libya. And then Bolton goes on to say, I come back to Tehran in 1979 with the hostage crisis, that if we're not careful here, we're going to see a repetition of that crisis, hostage-taking, deaths, which, of course, was a major factor contributing to the destruction of the Jimmy Carter administration. So that is the plan. And you've heard on Fox News yesterday evening, that is Fox News on O'Reilly and I think also on Hannity, you had various people being interviewed who more or less said something in that direction, right? Carter, hostage crisis, make Obama look really bad. So that would have been September 13th in the evening. Now, here's the complicating element in this is the unbelievable stupidity and ineptitude of Romney, the worst candidate. From a technical demagogical point of view, this is the most inept, the most bungling, the stupidest, the least capable in terms of propaganda techniques and so forth of anybody that we've ever seen. So you have to step back now and get to their point of view, right? The neocons around Romney are boiling with anger and resentment. They've been denigrated, right? They've been, the American people hate them. Their man Bush left office with a 22% popularity. They've been completely frozen out of power during the Obama years. They've seen everybody oohing and eyeing that Obama can get all these wonderful results. He can overthrow all these governments without the need for direct U.S. military intervention. And the neocons, of course, they're one-trick ponies. They're wedded to the idea that when there's a problem, the U.S. must bomb it, the U.S. must invade, the U.S. must occupy, and there's just no two ways about that. And that's all there is. Forget about playing one enemy against another. Forget about color revolutions. They're not interested in that. That's all for wimps. The only people that count are the bombers, right? The stranglers are not good enough. The people that want to deal with Iran based on economic warfare, economic sanctions. No, that's not good enough, say the neocons. So they're boiling with resentment. And they've shaped the mind of Romney, who knows obviously nothing about foreign affairs, except what the White Horse prophecy has told him. I take it. So 2 years ago, he came out with this book called No Apologies. Now I've got this book, the No Apologies book, and it alleges that Obama has gone around the world apologizing for U.S. foreign policy and so forth. If you go back and look in these various texts, it apparently is the case that there's no real explicit apology, but the idea is more or less he expressed embarrassment because of the aggression and fury of the Bush-Cheney neocons. So that's enough for Romney. So they've had this template in place, right? And it's part of it is opportunism. Part of it is that they really are enraged by the fact that their neocon faction has taken it on the chin. So they've had this press release ready to go, right? They just had to fill in the blanks. They put in Egypt in this case. They refer only to Egypt. And they say, all right, you're apologizing again, and that means you sympathize with the enemy of the United States. So you're pro-terrorist Obama. Now, of course, there's a huge mass of empirical material here about Hillary Clinton cavorting with people from Al Qaeda. As long as they're fighting Assad in Syria, they're very much welcome. Ambassador Stevens, Ambassador Ford, the rest of them, all of them playing footsie with these Al Qaeda types, and the Muslim Brotherhood, right? The Ikhwan of Egypt, putting them into power. That was all inevitable and planned. So now the incident comes along, right? They've been ready to go. They've got this press release in the icebox, and it gets to be the late afternoon, evening of 9/11, and they say, oh, now we've got these big demonstrations in Egypt at the U.S. Embassy. They've breached the wall. They've gone in. They've caused some damage. We're going to launch. But then they said, wait, we promised that we wouldn't engage in partisan politics on 9/11, so let's put out the release, and it'll be embargoed until midnight. But then they saw that the hours were going by, and they got so antsy that they said, we'll put it at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, September 11th. And that's what they did. And what it shows is that Romney is a complete bungler, completely inept and incompetent, even as a demagogue. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Follow all of this, of course, at Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net, Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed. Watch Tarpley.net. We'll have something about Romney very, very soon. Bishop Romney's Tradition, I think it's going to be. Bishop Romney's Tradition, Polygamy, Theocracy, and Secessionism, and the Mormons, from which he says he derives his tradition, and I take him at his word. I think he probably does. So what is that tradition? We've got Dinesh D'Souza running around saying, oh, we're allowed to look into Obama's father because Obama wrote Dreams of My Father. Well, let's look at his father and see what the dreams might be. And from this he derives a completely fictitious anti-colonial program. Well, Obama is the main exponent of colonialism in today's world. It's colonialism under the cover of color revolutions, the overthrow of Ben Ali, the overthrow of Mubarak, the overthrow of Gaddafi, the civil war in Syria, of Yemen, all done by Obama. But again, his method says it's legit to look at the father. Well, I did look at the father. Take a look at Barack H. Obama, the unauthorized biography. Take a look at Obama, the postmodern coup, which is, again, warning about color revolutions. So if Dinesh D'Souza can do that in his movie, right, 2016, I think it's called, if that's legit, then it's plenty legit to look at this very tight-knit, tradition-oriented, tinged with fanaticism Mormon community. And I hope if we have some time, we can talk about George Romney. New discoveries about George Romney, and not pretty, the father of the current candidate. Let's do it in honor of Dinesh D'Souza. Here's the problem with Romney now. What Romney needed to do when you had these attacks, starting on September 11th in Cairo and in Libya, right? 2 attacks going on. It would have been wise for Romney, and this is what all of these Republicans and so forth have been saying, is you should shut up for a while and let the crisis hit Obama, right? Saying, oh, Obama, you promised us singing tomorrows with the color revolutions. You helped to overthrow Mubarak and Ben Ali and Gaddafi, and you're leading the charge against Assad in Syria. And now we have these results. Why, they still hate us. They still hate us. Look at these embassy demonstrations, right, by the crowd of dupes and by then the armed hardcore of professional killers in the middle of it sometimes. And this just let Obama take the fall, right? It's tarnishing his entire outlook, right? His entire heritage, right? His legacy from the first term is going up in smoke. So Romney, shut your yap, go to the sidelines, and let the crisis damage Obama. And instead, Romney is so stupid, so inept. He's got this thing. He really is a robot, right? In other words, the robot is programmed if anybody says apologize or, we deplore or we regret, then Romney's got to go into overdrive saying, that's treason, you're sympathizing with the enemy, and so forth. And this was so stupidly done that this has now blown back in Romney's stupid mug. However, if this stuff goes on, right, if we get some hostages, if we get some more assassinations, and so on, then things will look a little bit different. And what the Romney gaffe, the Romney ineptitude, will probably be then overtaken by the general tragedy of the situation, which it points to the real thing, that under Obama, Al-Qaeda has taken over Libya, the death squads have taken over Libya, and the Muslim Brotherhood has taken over Egypt. And is that a good thing? Both of these groups funded and controlled by the Saudis. And again, concerning that death squad operating near Benghazi, I think they would look to the U.S., but they'd also look to the Saudis, because the Saudis are, in many cases, the paymasters. Now, a couple of other things to wrap up this profile of these demonstrations. People now see the Arab Spring was a hoax. Yes, the Arab Spring was a hoax. It was not a real revolution anywhere, as far as I can see. The aspirations of these populations have now been stimulated, but they have not been satisfied. In other words, the depression goes on. The world economic depression continues to lash these populations like everybody else. And, of course, here it's much further down the road, so they are up against all kinds of existential need. These places need a second revolution. From the February Revolution in Russia to the October Revolution, you probably need a second revolution to put some kind of actual revolutionary government in place. This has not happened. And above all, the places that need a real revolution, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Morocco, Oman. These are the places that still need a first revolution. And I think it is important to point out that the violence and the ideology that causes these violent events, as we're seeing, is largely financed by Saudi Arabia. In other words, the overthrow of the Saudi monarchy would probably be the single biggest contribution that one could make to a pacification of relations between the Christian, Orthodox, Buddhist, Hindu, and other worlds on the one hand, and the Muslim world on the other. In other words, the irritant, the thing that causes friction, is certainly not the middle class of Algeria or Egypt or any place like this. It's the Saudis, and the fact that since they are so backward, they've got to finance these militant, backward people, which is what they then fund. So if you didn't have the Saudi monarchy, you wouldn't have these Wahhabites churning out their recruits and so forth. So that's that picture. Now let's go on to George Romney. Let's go on to this. We want to talk about the Romney family. The point being, again in this case, right? Romney does this big, super patriotic trip about how he loves the United States and how he just boils over with resentment when anything happens to our flag or anything like this. Well, this is really hard to reconcile with the tradition of the Romney family. Now, let's just go back to this, right? We have Miles A. Romney coming from a small town in England near Liverpool back in the 1840s, joining up with Joseph Smith at Nauvoo, Illinois. This is the first Romney, Miles A. Romney, from Lower Penwortham near Liverpool, England, converted by Mormon missionaries in 1837, and again, without some kind of permission from the British government, you just don't get to do this. It is a police state. It has been a police state in some ways since we had the pursuivants under Queen Elizabeth I in the mid-1500s. But this is where it starts. So we'll use the last two segments more or less to tell that story and say a word about the Antietam and South Mountain and Harper's Ferry's anniversary. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with everything at Tarpley.net, Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed, and above all, take a look. There'll be this the written report, special report book, Bishop Romney's Tradition, about polygamy, theocracy, and secessionism. So, Miles A. Romney, in 1841, left northern England, right around Liverpool, made the journey to Nauvoo, Illinois. He was a skilled carpenter, went to work on the Nauvoo Temple, arriving in Nauvoo, and then their son, Miles Park Romney, important guy, born August 18th, 1843. So Joseph Smith assassinated in June 1844, faction fight to take over, right? Leadership struggle won by Brigham Young. Unfortunately, the Romneys are too poor to join the first wagon train going from Illinois to to Nebraska, right, to the so-called winter quarters, and then on to Salt Lake City. So they've got to stay behind and try to build up some money. But when they get there, Salt Lake City, Miles A. Romney is put to work on the Salt Lake City Temple. Now, they have a family. One of their sons is George Romney. George Romney takes up arms against the United States already in 1857-58. George Romney, this would be the current Romney's great-great-great-uncle or something like this. The eldest son of Miles A. Romney and Elizabeth joins a brigade of Mormon Danite militia preparing to hold a line of trenches blocking the passage through the Echo Canyon. This is where one of the main modern roads goes through. If you're coming from Colorado and further east, the easiest way is through this Echo Canyon. The Mormons have fortified this against who? Against the United States, against U.S. troops on U.S. territory. So this is armed rebellion, this is treason, and this is 1857, 1858. Miles Park Romney, the direct ancestor of the current candidate, wanted to go to join the armed Danites in the trenches to fight against the United States, but the Mormon totalitarian regime told him he had to stay in town and keep doing what he wanted. Miles P. Romney was told by Brigham Young when to get married, how many wives he should have. Mitt Romney is obviously embarrassed. Here's what Mitt Romney says in one of his campaign biographies. They were trying to build the generation out there in the desert, so he, Miles Park Romney, took additional wives as he was told to do. And I must admit, I can't imagine anything more awful than polygamy. But that's what you're working for in heaven, Mitt. You're working for a celestial harem. Isn't that the word from Kolob out there? So this is a very, very strange thing. This is also what you hear from Glenn Beck, right? Glenn Beck says, no, it was not really theology, it was just demography. So many men had been killed by these awful mobs and oppressors, and that is, of course, true, but that the polygamy was a response to that to try to keep a certain number of people around. This is absolutely not true. The polygamy had started long before these large numbers of victims. We have the story of Hannah Hood Hill Romney. That's his first wife, came from Canada, from Toronto. This unfortunate woman married Miles Park. Miles Park was then told very soon after the wedding, Brigham Young says, you're going to go to England, and this is all on your own expense, right? There's no travel budget. You're told to do it. So he's sent off. This Hannah Hood Hill Romney is the victim of polygamy, of abandonment, because when she leaves, Miles A. Romney doesn't send her any money, right? He just doesn't care. So Miles Park Romney is Miles Park Romney is now off to Britain, leaving his wife behind, not providing anything for her. She has to become a drudge, a washerwoman, too bad for her, I guess, in the Mormon world. So Miles P. Romney gets over there and starts writing for the Millennial Star in October 1864, right, when you have, battles going on around Petersburg, battles going on in the Shenandoah Valley, battles going on. We're going to have the Battle of Nashville and all this stuff. What does Miles P. Romney do? He attacks the United States from abroad, talking about how the wonderful Mormons are being persecuted by the awful U.S. regime. So this is not a very patriotic story for Mitt. So 1867, Brigham Young orders Miles Romney to join the ranks of the polygamists, take a second wife. The poor Hannah Hood Hill. Romney is in despair. Miles P. Romney is basically a flunky for Brigham Young, does everything Brigham Young tells him. Not every Mormon was this slavish, right, this dog-like in following the orders of the prophet. Takes a second wife. The second wife psychologically can't do it. She wants full-time attention. That marriage ends in divorce. Then there are going to be other wives. Their son eventually is Gaskell Romney. That's the direct ancestor of Mitt. So now, in 1882, we have the Edmunds Anti-Polygamy Act. Right, the U.S. government had declared polygamy illegal in the Morrill Act of 1862, and the Edmunds Anti-Polygamy Act attempts to put more teeth into that. So Miles P. Romney is now just sent away 400 miles southeast across the Colorado River to St. John's, Arizona. And here we have a newspaper battle between the Mormon-published Orion Era and the anti-Mormon Apache Chief. So here's what we hear from the Apache Chief, the anti-Mormon paper about Miles P. Romney. He's a mass of putrid pus and rotten goose pimples, a skunk with the face of a baboon, the character of a louse, the breath of a buzzard, and the record of a perjurer and common drunkard. I wonder what the Oppo research could do with that today. Mitt's great-great-uncle, that is to say the same George, right, the George that we saw out there ready to fight against the United States forces, was arrested under the federal anti-polygamy law and spent 6 months in prison. So they got a jailbird in the family. In 1885, in April, Miles P. Romney leaves the United States and flees to Mexico. Isn't this interesting? When the question is, do you support the United States? Are you an American patriot? Or do you want to go and practice polygamy? The Romneys say, polygamy forever. Viva Mexico. So Mexico and polygamy trumps the United States and the Edmunds Anti-Polygamy Act. So they go to Colonia Juarez, Mexico. On September 24th, 1890, William Woodruff of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, essentially bows to necessity and says, I just had a revelation that we should now end the practice of polygamy. And this is because first of all, they knew that they could never get into the Union if they kept having this polygamy going. And the other thing is, even more urgent, was that there was a new law which was going to allow the confiscation, the seizure of all Mormon Church, LDS property. It's like a little bit like the RICO statute, right? That if you're engaged in criminal activity, we're going to seize your assets. So he says, I publicly declare my advice to the Latter-day Saints is to refrain from contracting any marriages forbidden by the law of the land. And there was the escape clause was that if you were in Mexico, if there was no explicit law against polygamy, you could go on doing it. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., where the pollen count is high. We're just going through the story of the Romney family. Romney family values, number one, polygamy, not patriotism. Let me just say, though, before we continue with that, just so that we mark these Civil War anniversaries. This is a very big one, right? We're just, today's September 14th. 150 years ago, we had the Battle of South Mountain near here. General McClellan had gotten a hold of Lee's secret orders and had realized what the Confederates were doing during this invasion of Maryland. And, of course, this was all coordinated with the British attempting to get a British-French intervention into this situation. This is actually one of the most dangerous crises because of the British and the French lurking in the background. And this is where the U.S. envoy to St. Petersburg goes to the Imperial Russian Foreign Ministry and gets a declaration of support that Russia will not allow the British and the French to attack the United States. And this is backed up by a pretty serious ultimatum. And this makes Lord Russell and Lord Palmerston and Gladstone in London, as well as Napoleon III, back down. So the anniversaries we're going through right now are today, September 14th, 1862. It's the Battle of South Mountain, with McClellan successfully punching through these passes and driving Lee back on Sharpsburg near the Potomac, Antietam Creek, Sharpsburg, Maryland. On the 15th, the Confederates seize Harper's Ferry and take many thousand U.S. prisoners. A disaster. Actually, it's the biggest disaster until the Philippines in 1942 in World War II. On September 17th, we have the Battle of Antietam. This still remains the biggest one-day battle in U.S. history. 12,000 U.S. casualties, 12,000 plus. Confederate casualties, 11,000 plus. Lee's army decimated, and he then retreats across the Potomac. And, of course, the objection that Lincoln had was that McClellan did not do what was necessary to obliterate, to annihilate Lee's army. We needed a battle of annihilation to bring this entire thing to an end. And McClellan, whatever his tactical effects in this battle were, was not thinking in terms of battles of annihilation. He was thinking, I think, in terms of a negotiated peace, and he also had this other fantasy going on that he could actually have a coup d'etat. At the same time, Braxton Bragg was attacking into Tennessee and northern Mississippi. So we have these two battles of Yucca and Corinth, and this is one of the places where Grant shows his superior generalship. So it's only when we have Lee driven out of Maryland and the Van Horn and Price driven out of Tennessee and back into northern Mississippi that this very acute danger comes to an end. So people should take a look at that. Look on the various websites, and the significance of this is next week, the 22nd of September, is the issuance of the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. That is the political effect of these military actions. It was enough of a victory for Lincoln to override objections from Seward and others in the cabinet. This would not seem like a desperate shriek of the U.S. trying to foment a slave rebellion in the Confederacy while the Confederates were apparently winning. This was now principle and military necessity joined, and obviously perfectly legal under the Constitution. You can't engage in armed rebellion and then turn around and demand constitutional rights. It doesn't work, as General Sherman often said. But in any case, as long as you're in rebellion, you're subjected to war measures, and that can easily mean freeing of slaves. So this is the death knell of slavery. That is why this time, right, 150 years ago, is so important, right? The extirpation of human chattel slavery from the United States with the Emancipation Proclamation, and then everywhere under the 13th Amendment, because the Emancipation Proclamation only applies to areas that are in rebellion, right? So it's not a universal wipeout of slavery. That is necessary in order to make it legal at the time and not create an additional constitutional crisis. But Lincoln was able to do all of that. So hats off to Lincoln, as always, and something to celebrate. The 22nd of September, the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation to begin the process of wiping out slavery and of winning the war, because as Lincoln said, if you don't use the lever of emancipation in the way that he did, you can't hope to defeat the Confederates. And this is why we've had this slogan, right? The answer to 1984 is 1776. Yes, but 1776 alone will not do it. It's got to be 1776 supplemented by 1861 to 1865. And above all, January 1st, 1863 is when that preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, coming out next week, 150 years ago, when that is actually the Emancipation Proclamation, the slaves in areas rebelling against the United States will be henceforth and forever free. Henceforth and forever free. So those anniversaries are all around us right now. Now let's just go back to this polygamous stuff. Really, the ban on polygamy of September 1890 by William Woodruff of the Mormons, this is really public relations. It has to be repeated several times. One interesting case is that when we have Joseph F. Smith, I think it's Joseph Fielding Smith, the nephew of the prophet, he becomes the first president, and later on he says, this is about 1905, he declares a second ban on polygamy, but he continues in secret to continue conducting polygamous marriages. Plus, you had the top leaders of the Mormon Church were living as polygamists until 1945. It looks like the last one was Heber Grant, who kept practicing polygamy in public. Now, what does Mitt Romney think about all this? In the 2004 book Turnaround, he said he never mentions the word polygamy. He talks about the Mormons. This is what he says. He wants to portray his ancestors as victims, the same thing we saw with Glenn Beck. The quote from Romney, quote, "Theirs was a life of toil and sacrifice, of complete devotion to a cause. They were persecuted for their religious beliefs, but they went forward undaunted." Wait a minute. It's not your beliefs. It's an overt act which leads then to intolerable abuses. Polygamy is intolerable, and the byproducts, right, which is essentially statutory rape on a vast scale, this is unacceptable, right? This takes you outside of Christianity and outside of Western civilization. And has Romney reformed since 2004? No. In his campaign biography of 2010, this is the No Apologies volume, he says, this is now Mitt Romney writing about his father, "My father knew what it meant to pursue the difficult. He was born in Mexico, where his Mormon grandparents had moved to escape religious persecution." That's not what it was. They were escaping prosecution under federal laws banning polygamy, which they insisted on practicing. The other interesting thing is the attitude of these Mormons towards the Mexican Revolution, right? Pancho Villa drove them out. In other words, the Romneys would have stayed in Mexico until the present day if Pancho Villa and his Revolutionary Army had not come around in the state of Chihuahua, where Colonia Juarez was located, and driven them back into the United States, right? We would have been rid of them forever with their polygamous colony, but no, unfortunately, they had to come back here. So that's the story. In the next week, we'll have George Romney working for pro-fascists in the aluminum industry, George Romney working for pro-fascists in the automobile industry, and George Romney as a devotee of the pro-fascist moral rearmament movement of Frank Buchman, the so-called Buchmanite moral rearmament, and this was the basis of Romney's 1968 campaign, which did not go over well. And we'll see you